Warning. This podcast features the truth about owning and operating mobile home parks. The following program is not designed to be sexy. It will not hype you up on MHPs. Rather, this is a raw take on this industry and how you find your own path to success. Welcome to MHP IRL, Mobile Home Parks in Real Life, with your host, Ryan Norris.
Rather than making this a striptease, I'll start with the punchline. Yes, being unethical is good for business. Did that make you uncomfortable? Did you disagree with that? Good. That means you're likely one of the good guys. Now let me unpack this unfortunate fact of life, which is that bad people don't always lose, and worse, they often thrive. Unethical people aren't limited by the extra legal rules that you and I, the good people, force upon ourselves. Here's a great example of this. Ian and I had a chance to buy a 1.5-star park from a broker at pricing we thought was just way too high for the lower quality of the asset. To be more specific, the seller wanted an in-place 4.4% cap rate. Yeah, premium pricing for a less than desirable asset. We determined the local market to be about $250 a month. We figured if we improved the quality of the community to a 2.5 or 3-star, that we could, by year 3, realistically push the community to $295. We may still be above market at $295 in year 3, but by then, the improved quality would justify the slightly higher price. But even at $295, the deal just didn't look that great. If everything went perfectly, and I mean perfectly, we maybe could have pulled off a 10% levered cash-on-cash return. In other words, lots of work, lots of risk, and little upside. So when the seller wouldn't budge on his pricing, we walked. Flash forward a year later, the park traded for a similar price. Someone pulled it off. How? Well, as it turns out, we discovered they raised rents to $400 a month. Yes, you heard right. The new owners cranked rents up day one to $150 above market. And I know multiple owners in the same market at or below $190. Using our underwriting, $400 per month pushes levered cash-on-cash returns to nearly 20%. In other words, by not letting ethics stand in their way, the new owners achieved strong returns without breaking any laws. Let's take a step back and look at two books, Niccolò Machiavelli's The Prince and Johnny Heller's The Dictator's Handbook: Why Bad Behavior is Almost Always Good Politics. The Prince is famous for the line, "It's best to be feared and loved, but if you cannot be both, it's best to be feared." But there's another revolutionary line from The Prince that's relevant here, which is, "The ends justify the means." The Dictator's Handbook seconds that quote, citing that unfortunately many human rights violations and wicked behavior actually ended up having positive consequences for some, along with the atrocities for others. Need some examples? In the Americas alone, you had Christopher Columbus, the Trail of Tears, slavery, Manifest Destiny, colonialism, and so on and so on. Now that we are good and uncomfortable, let's get philosophical. To whom does a company need to be ethical towards? If given the choice between a positive outcome for a city or for shareholders, wouldn't it be unethical for a CEO whose salary is paid for by these shareholders to choose the city. Wouldn't it be unethical to take an investor's money and not make the most sound financial decision with it? Say, for example, you sell bananas, and in this market, all bananas, including yours, are identical. All vendors sell for 10 cents a banana, but you discover you could sell your inventory for 20 cents a banana, meaning you have buyers willing to pay above market for the exact same thing. Wouldn't it be unethical for you, the business owner, to take an investor's money and not charge what the market would pay for? If the market will pay more for the exact same thing, basic supply and demand economics says your pricing should increase. And if you don't, you aren't being optimal with your capital. Do you agree with that logic? It doesn't matter. People use that identical logic to justify upcharging in plenty of industries, from insulin shots to cell phones. But karma will catch up to them, right? As history demonstrates, that's not always the case. Okay, so bad behavior can work. And arguably, it might not even be bad behavior. Let's analyze. Being bad is riskier, period. While being bad removes limitations otherwise good, ethical people subject themselves to, one can incur tremendous costs. So what do bad people risk? Reputation. A tarnished reputation may end one's ability to do business ever again. Bankruptcy. There is an upward limit on what a market is willing to pay. Luck. Being bad depends on the luck of not getting caught. Building a business dependent on being lucky may not prove sustainable in the long run. Legislation. While unethical behavior may not be against the law, usually governments create laws to rein in bad behavior. And that's the point I ultimately want to discuss: legislation. New York State just passed some debilitating rent control laws. I remember learning about this from a friend of mine that's an avid listener of this podcast. The laws might ruin his business, even though he's one of the good guys. Let me explain. Studies show rent control doesn't work, and it makes sense why it doesn't. Let's use my friend's park to explain the research. The park in question needs a heavy lift. From the shooting that occurred during due diligence to the local municipality hell-bent on shutting the park down, this property needs it all. And that's okay. Why? Because my friend bought it at a price low enough that after years of hard work improving the park's quality, he will make good money for himself and his investors while improving the quality of life for his residents and the city in the process. Everybody wins. But that's only if my friend can raise rents to market. Notice how I didn't say over market. I simply said to market. Restrictive legislation kills reasonable rent growth, meaning my friend couldn't legally raise his rent to market within a practical time frame. If he can't raise rents, he won't make enough money to justify his hard work and the risk he willfully accepted. So why would he work hard if the financial incentive doesn't lie at the end of the journey? Why should he hustle turning a 1-star property into a 3-star property if he can't raise rents? With rents stuck and a tenant base already willing to pay for current conditions, he could do nothing and get paid the exact same. Inaction would be the logical choice. And that is what studies found. The risks outweigh the rewards, discouraging further capital and time investment and encouraging inaction. But it gets worse. Why would anyone buy his asset? Think about it like this. Since he can't reasonably raise rents, this lowers his park's value. And if he overpaid relative to what it would be worth after the legislation, he may not be able to sell for a reasonable price, or worse, he may not even be able to get what he paid for it. So if he isn't incentivized to work because he's going to get paid the exact same regardless, and he can't sell his property for even what he paid for it, why work hard and why sell? Restrictive rent laws create slumlords, even from good, hard-working landlords. Unfortunately, as this behavior persists, it will spread. Malcolm Gladwell, in a recent article in The New Yorker, spoke of the idea of thresholds of violence. These thresholds are defined as the number of people we must see already engaged in an activity before we decide it's okay to join them. A decent example to describe this is dancing at a wedding. Let's say your Aunt Barbara loves dancing, but will not be seen dancing alone, meaning she requires at least one other person on the dance floor before she'll hop in. Let's say your Uncle John is similar, but he requires 2 people already dancing to jump in. Then let's say it goes on and on, all the way up to your grandmother, who won't dance, period, unless she's the last one on the dance floor. Everyone at the wedding reception has a threshold. So, in theory, one person dancing can slowly create a snowball effect. Once the first person hits the dance floor, soon thereafter, Aunt Barbara joins. And then because there are 2 people dancing, Uncle John now feels comfortable enough to join. This pattern continues until everyone's threshold is met, even Grandma's. Obviously, this ties back into mobile home parks, as each time a company cranks a property's rent well above market, another person starts dancing, so to speak. So, can we even do anything about this? Or are we doomed to the sidelines, watching as more and more people flood the dance floor? If you haven't already connected the dots, let's do it now. Like Stephen Covey's example in his book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, if you push the goose that lays the golden eggs too hard, it'll stop altogether. We have already seen negative press about mobile home park owners cranking rents, featured in publications like Time Magazine, all the way to shows like John Oliver's Last Week Tonight. As more companies behave this way, more thresholds will be passed, so unless we can somehow discourage this behavior, there may not be an end in sight, forcing the government to take action. Then those restrictive rent laws we saw in New York State will follow nationwide. And like always, the folks who will be most hurt by these potentially inevitable restrictive rent control laws will be our tenants. Our industry has a vulnerability that unethical people exploit for their own personal gain to the detriment of the industry for the rest of us. And there may not be anything we can do about it. Restrictive, debilitating legislation may be necessary to stymie the spreading of obnoxiously high above market rent raises. Irreparable damage may be inevitable. Bad guys do win. And bad guys don't see themselves as the bad guys. Like they say, history is written by the victors. And the victors omit and downplay the atrocities they commit along their conquests. Why? Like Machiavelli said, the ends justify the means. Adding sound logic to aid in the denial of wrongdoing blocks the ego from damage and shame. And winning makes that denial so much easier too. It makes me uncomfortable thinking about it, much less talking about it. As much as I don't want to end this episode with doom and gloom, do I even have an option? If I told you everything's going to be okay, I'd be encouraging you to not do anything. If I ignore the wicked and opt to push the same hype story about how lucrative mobile home parks can be, I'd be guilty of adding fuel to the fire that's encouraged some people of questionable ethics to push this industry towards a potentially ugly era. People need to hear what I'm saying. We can't afford to pretend it doesn't happen or think that it'll all sort itself out. So I'll be the one to publicly distribute the bad news. And that, I feel, is the point of MHP IRL. You listen in for truth, not warm and fuzzy. And sometimes the truth really hurts to acknowledge. But I'm an optimistic person. And I want this podcast to encourage people like you to improve this industry with me. What happens in Hollywood? Sure, the good guys unrealistically always win. But the movies always start off grim. The bad guys appear unstoppable. The odds look impossible. Despite an ominous onset, the good guys eventually triumph. Here's where I'd like to say I have a surefire way we can combat this, but I don't. I wish I could say that if we show off the great things we are doing in this industry, we could make the case for how restrictive legislation would harm our positive progress. I wish I could say that if we stop perpetuating this golden age idea that clearly doesn't exist anymore and is not coming back post-recession, that people wouldn't go out and raise tens of millions in funds off false suppositions. I wish I could say that if we change the narrative to one of raw truth, that mobile home parks aren't highly lucrative passive investments, that maybe wannabe slumlords wouldn't bother entering the space. Maybe raising awareness is the only real way we can affect positive change. So where do we begin? Start talking about it. Raise awareness. Use words like active, not passive. Say hard-earned, not easily achieved. And if you don't want to do the talking, I'll do it for you. Share this episode. It's time we all step up. Our tenants and our industry depend on it. Would having my due diligence list help you? If so, I will let you have it for free. That's right. My list that took me 3 years to develop and includes plenty of fixes for mistakes that I made that now you can avoid. All absolutely free. All I ask for in exchange is leave me a 5-star review and a comment. Screenshot your comment after it goes live and email it to me at my website, archimedesgrp.com. Afterwards, let's connect. This episode was inspired by a listener just like you. Even if you don't have any ideas for future episodes, let's still connect, as I'm sure there are ways you and I can help each other out. I'm looking forward to chatting soon.